When I first became an OSR referee and a blogger, I wrestled with referee styles and it inadvertently created this term, the Quantum Ogre, in a discussion with several bloggers at the time. Today, we're going to talk about where that came from, but more importantly, using it as a thought vehicle to understand two distinct referee styles and answer the question, which one are you? The Quantum Ogre is like a mirror that we can hold up and identify elements of our ref style. What do you stand for? What brings you satisfaction and joy when you're running a game? So that's today. We're going to talk about quantum ogres and referee styles. And while I can't speak for you, I can talk about where I find joy as a referee. It'll be good. Hi, I'm John. I'm a longtime referee. My channel is a place where I share tips and tricks on how to be a better OSR style referee. And since I'm running a lot of Shadow Dark, we talk about that too. All right, let's dive into today's topic. So where'd the Quantum Ogre come from? It started in a blog post as a thought experiment. You can see the setup here. There's 3 woods. Somewhere in the woods, there's a layer with treasure and a MacGuffin in it, and an ogre that moves between the different woods. And I postulated 2 different referee styles. This is when I was trying to figure out how to be a sandbox referee. One referee would just place things down and forget about it. And another referee might be willing to hold stuff back and keep it a little bit more dynamic. See what the players choose first. And I imagined the dynamic referee like a shifty leprechaun, those guys in Central Park, New York, with the cups and the pea in there, like moving things around. Actually, in fact, the original article was called Shell Game in the Sandbox. And I no longer really think in those terms anymore, like illusionism or railroading. I don't think they're useful and they're a bit pejorative. Instead, I tend to think that there's 2 referee styles, a storyteller type of referee and a neutral arbiter. Neither are right or wrong. Just think about referee styles as tools and techniques that we use to achieve certain outcomes at the table. And I think that's a much more useful framing. So this is the Quantum Ogre setup. The idea is that the referee is going to hold the content back, wait till the players decide on their course of action for the evening. They leave the village, they decide to go explore one of the woods or gather information or do whatever they do. But once they finally commit on a course of action, then the referee is going to structure the content to lead to what they think is going to be the most exciting or interesting game night. The second style just places the content and lets the chips fall. They put the layer with the MacGuffin in it over there in woods number 1, maybe roll dice to figure out where the ogre is at any given time. Oh, look, I rolled a 5 and a 6. The ogre is out there in woods number 3, and the players choose to go into woods number 1. And so they get the treasure and they don't have to have a boss fight. And so I think of that first style where you might be willing to hold the content back as part of this storyteller referee definition. Being a storyteller means that you're prioritizing narrative goals for the game session over playing the world as it is. And so making friends with the Quantum Ogre is just one example. The storyteller might be running an adventure path or some kind of narrative sequence where they've got goals they want to nudge the story towards. Maybe they just want to prioritize entertainment at the table and make sure everyone has a good time every night, that it's exciting, but not too exciting. So for instance, if you use a referee screen and maybe you adjust encounters on the fly, I'll give you an example. The boss is laying waste to your player. So you take the boss from 80 hit points down to 40. They don't know the difference behind the scenes, but now the encounter is a little bit more survivable. Or the converse, the players are destroying your boss, and suddenly a group of minions come in from a side passage and start to even the odds a little bit. Again, you're willing to up the danger level on the fly because you think it's going to lead to a more exciting night at the table. A storyteller might disregard the dice entirely. Again, you're rolling behind the screen. So it is a little bit of an end justifies the means mindset, but the outcome you're looking for if you are a storyteller type referee basically is predictability. Like if you have a planned story You want to make choices in terms of how you run your game so that the narrative unfolds the way it needs to. And I think of this style as sort of excitement is guaranteed, but death isn't. Um, a TPK at the wrong time can completely derail the adventure path or the narrative. And I tend to think that the majority of referees in our hobby probably come from this school. Certainly, I think that's what's encouraged in 5e and adventure paths and things like that. The throwback style, more of that OSR type style or 1970s, 1980s style of referee is to be what I'm calling a neutral arbiter. This person builds a world and then just plays it as it is. They're not necessarily friends with the Quantum Ogre. They're going to take that guy and plop them down somewhere and then let the chips fall. Characteristics of this style is you're going to play the world as it is and just let the chips fall, accept whatever outcomes are happening. Frequently, if we're embodying this style, we're rolling all of our dice in the open because whatever happens, happens, and we want it instantly public and available for everyone to see. And I think Ivan Drago is like the perfect spokesman for this style. If he dies, he dies. And that doesn't just apply to the player characters. It applies to the referee as well. You need a certain level of detachment because sometimes the players are just going to destroy your boss. And sometimes the boss is just going to destroy the party. And if he dies, he dies. The outcomes that this style prioritizes are things like real consequences. We know what's happening out there in the setting is real. There's a sense that victories are earned. Players can see all the dice rolls are out in the open, and they know that you're not modulating things behind a Dungeon Master screen. But most importantly is the game's now open to unpredictability and surprise. And that's been the great learning for me, that I get great joy from being surprised and not controlling the outcomes. I don't know if this is true. I think of it more like an article of faith. But the idea is that whatever the players do and choose will always be more exciting and interesting. Maybe not in the short term, but definitely in the long term than if I tried to control a narrative or plan a story. Again, because it's real. So by letting the chips fall, rolling the dice in the open, the players' victories are real and their celebrations are real. And then the other component is that thinking about what happens next as a referee, like playing the world and trying to understand what consequences will be next, is actually really fun. As an example, like let's go back to the Quantum Ogre slide with the Neutral Arbiter referee. So yes, the player snuck into the lair, got the gold, didn't fight the ogre. They retreat to the village, celebrating, having fun. If we're playing Shadowdark, maybe they even go carousing. And then the next morning, a bunch of farmers come into town. Buckethead, the ogre, has gone on a rampage. One farmer's like, he killed my day laborer, took away my prized goat. Another says he rampaged through my paddock, killing my cows, screaming out about how someone looted all of his gold and stole from him or something. And now the players have to figure out what they're going to do. First off, that seems like a pretty reasonable consequence to what happened. But now the players, at least one or two of my players at least, would be like, la, 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 I think we need to leave town. One person would be, come on, guys, we can profit off of this. Let's just charge these guys a bunch of money and go kill the ogre. And then there's always one or two lawful characters in the group who are going to say, come on, guys, we're the ones who kicked this particular hornet's nest. Like, we owe it to the villagers to go take care of this ogre problem. But the point is, they're going to debate and figure it out and choose their own course of action. And whatever they do, it's going to be more interesting than, or I believe it's going to be more interesting than if I had structured the original encounter so that they fought the boss, they got the treasure, and it unfolded that way. So I always say, put yourself in a position to play the world straight with the players. You do need to detach from your expectations a little bit. What do the Buddhists say? Like expectations lead to suffering. So my daughter uses the term unbothered. She's 20. If you don't let anything get to you, just be like, you're unbothered. The neutral arbiter needs to be an unbothered referee. And one term you see talked about for these kind of situations is emergent story. The idea that if you're a neutral arbiter, you're just going to let things unfold at the table, that the resultant events, especially viewed after the fact, create a more interesting narrative than a planned story. And this is a muscle you build through practice. So you have to get used to it. It's okay. If you think about the example I just talked about with Buckethead, the Quantum Ogre, there's an upbeat because the players pop into the woods and find the treasure and they celebrate and they go carouse. And then there's a natural downbeat that happens when a bunch of distraught farmers come into town, bewailing the fact that now there's a rampaging ogre running amok in the countryside. So you will develop a sense for emergent story the more you do this. I've got two examples also before we wrap. So one, I played a convention game earlier this year. I always bring homebrew adventures. In this particular adventure, the players, they're in a ruined city and they're going to go into a dungeon that takes them under a glacier. And they had a map to the entrance of the dungeon. And before they entered, the thief said, wait, I want to scout. I want to see what else is around. And I always build at least 2 or 3 different entrances into the dungeon. So sure enough, he scaled the glacier and found the remains of a ruined camp and a tunnel into the dungeon. And there was a lot of signposting about how dangerous it was going to be. But they chose to go that way anyway. And they landed in a boss fight immediately. The danger and intensity spiked, and the first hour and a half of the game was them trying to get past this really difficult encounter. And they ended up experiencing the dungeon somewhat backwards because they'd run into other factions in the dungeon, like the dwarves, who were like, oh, be careful in the northeast. There's this horrible thing up there. My players are like, you mean the crystal entity? Yeah, we destroyed it. And so as they went through the dungeon, they experienced it a little backwards, and it was really fun and different and really satisfying for me because I never would have expected the players to do that. Here's another example just from a couple weeks ago. So with one of my home groups, we're playing B5 Horror on the Hill. It's an old TSR adventure. In fact, there's a video somewhere on my channel where I talk about converting it from basic D&D to Shadowdark. So we finally finished it. And when you get to the 3rd level of the dungeon, there's an opportunity to fight a dragon. And it's a young red dragon. In Shadowdark terms, it was like a 9th level monster. The players are all 3rd level. This was going to be a very high risk, swingy fight because if a lot of them succumbed to dragon breath, it could easily be a TPK. Instead, they destroyed the dragon in 2 rounds. One of the players had a dragon slaying sword, one of those +1, +3 versus dragons kind of weapons. Of course, he rolled a crit. So he smacks it in the neck and does double damage. They had a thief who, the way his talents landed, he had the triple backstab, was able to go invisible with his elven cloak and got in a brutal backstab attack. And then while the dragon is breathing on the party, while some characters were dying and missed their saving throws in Shadowdark, their ability checks, a lot of them survived multiple rounds of dragon breath with good rolls. And they killed it really quickly. It was a little sad. It's not always easy being unbothered when you're the neutral arbiter. But for the players, this was a peak experience. One of them was like, I've played D&D for 15 years. I've never fought a dragon. Like the D&D gods have smiled upon us. This is awesome. The dwarf character fell backwards into the treasure and starts backstroking like Scrooge McDuck, and they had a fantastic time. And now the campaign has gone in a completely different direction because they're rich, they're famous, they killed a dragon, they were sent to the capital with a letter of commendation, they've met the Duke, they've met nobles in the duchy, and they've come to the attention of the Thieves Guild in the capital city. because they're trailing all their treasure in with them. So when I talk about real consequences in this neutral arbiter, emergent story kind of regime, they can be both positive and negative consequences. There's absolutely an argument for being a storyteller referee. I played a lot of 5th edition. I've done some adventure paths. I'm well aware of that part of the world, like using milestone experience and nudging the players down a prescripted narrative. But as you're considering OSR style play, I highly recommend you try to adopt this neutral arbiter mindset. Take joy in presenting situations instead of stories. Be surprised by how things turn out instead of planning how things turn out. And let go of your expectations. Take that Quantum Ogre guy, plop him right down there in the woods, play your world, and take satisfaction in real consequences. And then your players will start to enjoy real victories. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. But seriously, if you made it this far, thank you. You're awesome. Please consider subscribing to my channel. Hopefully this has triggered some ideas on how you can reflect on your own referee style. And if you're moving towards the OSR style, it will help you embrace being a neutral arbiter. I'll link to some other OSR referee advice here in the corner. And otherwise, thanks for being here and making it this far. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye.